G'day, welcome back to Collectivitis. Now you may have heard that recently here in Victoria, teachers and the teachers' unions have been pushing for a 35% wage increase, among other demands such as smaller class sizes and better working conditions. Now this comes as the Allen government is supposedly trying to tighten the purse strings to rein in the enormous debt that Victoria is in. Now, teachers in Victoria are underpaid according to Australian standards. Victoria is supposedly the education state, and yet New South Wales pays teachers an average of $10,000 a year more for the exact same role. Now, for those of you who don't know, I'm a high school English and history teacher by profession. Believe it or not, a YouTube channel with 500 odd subscribers doesn't exactly keep the lights on. So when I say that this is misguided, I would seem to be speaking against my own interests. But the truth is that unions demanding a wage rise from the government is exactly why education is in the sorry state that it's in the first place. The fact is, the profession of teaching in Australia is kept entirely separated from free market forces. In fact, the government works very hard for this to be the case. Public schools are entirely funded by the government, and therefore the wages of their teachers are arbitrarily selected by the government. Catholic schools or similar semi-private schools are mostly funded by the government, and their wages are also arbitrarily matched to the public school teacher ones. And while the posh, super expensive, fully private schools do have room for adjusting teacher wages, they only make up just over 10% of all schools, and they still use the same state-paid rate as a baseline indicator when negotiating wages. So the government regulates, and all teachers, within each state at least, are paid more or less the same. Is lobbying to get higher pay really a bad thing? I'm arguing that the whole system of having education tied to the public sector and removed from the forces of the free market is the issue. This is what's causing low wages, and this is what's causing bad outcomes for kids. Now, for reference to the bad outcomes, according to the Program for International Student Assessment, or PISA, which is conducted every 3 years, Australia's scores are down by about 6% in reading, maths, and science from the year 2000 to the year 2022, which translates to about 16 months of education in real terms. That's insane. 16 months behind in our educational outcomes compared to 22 years ago is bad enough, but when you consider that since that time, we've more than doubled our spending on education in Australia without an increase in inflation-adjusted wages, it's clear there is something rotten at the core. This shows that unions arbitrarily strong-arming the government to raise teacher wages with strikes and public pressure doesn't actually address the core reason why teacher wages are low and why educational standards in Victoria and Australia are going down. What needs to happen is the entire education system needs to be subjected to the forces of the free market. It needs to deregulate wages, and teachers need to disentangle themselves from unions for their own good. Now, I'm certain that if this were the case, the majority of teacher wages would actually increase. We know that Victoria has had a massive teacher shortage at the moment and in the last few years. If individual teachers and schools gained the power across the board to negotiate wages, schools would gain the power to pay more money to attract people who otherwise have stopped teaching, which has been a massive occurrence since COVID. Over time, this would create the competitive atmosphere around employment opportunities that unions hate, but which would benefit, guess who? Competent teachers. And to attract competent teachers, guess what else schools would be incentivized to do? Reduce class sizes, as no teacher I've met enjoys teaching classes of 29 or 30 kids, which I've done several times, mind you. Just like in every other industry, people who are good at their job would be able to leverage their abilities for higher wages and better conditions, and overall the educational standards everywhere would improve. Even the lowest performing state school would benefit from the flow-on effects of highly intelligent people taking up high-paying jobs in lavish private schools. Let's map it out. Let's say School A is a high-performing semi-private school and School B is a struggling school in a low socioeconomic area, which survives only with ample government funding. Now let's say that teacher wages are deregulated and union power is abolished. What would happen? The high-scoring semi-private School A can raise the wages of its most impressive teachers to ensure they remain, and can offer higher wages to impressive either former teachers or industry experts to come and teach at the school. This obviously incurs a higher cost to School A, but the semi-private school has wiggle room. Because it has a good reputation and now has the obvious benefit of excellent teachers, it has an enormous waitlist of parents who want to send their kids to the school, more than the school's capacity. They can now afford to raise the parent-paid component of the funding they receive per student and still fill their numbers because School A has responded to the free market's demand for an excellent product, education. This will obviously displace some teachers in School A, however. To make room for the new teachers coming in, some of the more middling teachers get pushed out and are looking for work. Here comes in School B. School B has some very good teachers too, but also a large number of jaded, checked-out teachers. I'm sure you've had the experience of some of these yourselves. Some of this comes from the fact that because the school is in a low socioeconomic area, there are lots of disengaged students. What these students need more than any is inspiration, and yet they have the largest proportion of teachers unlikely to provide it. But because School A has dropped some of their more middling teachers, School B has some choice in who to hire. Unhampered by the usual mass of unfireable union member teachers thanks to our hypothetical disentanglement from teacher unions, School B can get rid of the very worst teachers it has and replace them with those who couldn't keep their job at School A, overall improving the standards of education and likely the culture of the staff room. This example is obviously extremely simplified. It only involves a direct market relationship between two schools. You can see, however, how the relationship between Victoria's 1800 schools would be far more complex, and herein lies the beauty of the market. This also wouldn't be a one-time shift. Teachers would be constantly shifting and moving as they can be either fired from places or lured in with wages. The demographic of the type of person who teaches would shift dramatically over time as the upper limit on wages increases, and teaching would lose the horrid reputation of being simply a last option, where people who teach are only the ones who couldn't succeed in the real world of competition. It is the twofold relationship between unfireable long-term teachers who are the ones who benefit most from union memberships and the inability to pay excellent teachers more than others that ensures the worst of both worlds. Teacher wages remain low as the government would need to shell out more money for the wage increase rather than allow schools to make their own determinations and calculations, and educational standards suffer as some people stay in the job long after their desire to teach has faded, as they can do a poor job, collect a decent standardised paycheck if they've been doing the job for 10 years, and are safe in the knowledge that if their employer tries to fire them, the full force of the teachers' unions, which in Victoria, like all other unions, have significant political power, come to their defence. Now, I realise this is essentially free market 101. If you let market forces in, outcomes improve. If you're a libertarian like me or economically conservative, you already agree. In fact, I'd argue further and say that school vouchers given to parents should replace standard funding and public school zoning areas. But that's another conversation. Anyway, the counter-argument to all of this is, well, education is simply too important a service to be handed over to greedy capitalists. You often hear the same argument about things like healthcare. But the truth is that it is important. In fact, it's so important that we must put it in the hands of greedy capitalists who will ensure that the service being provided is good. In the same way that I would prefer a motivated by money, excellent doctor to treat my illnesses to an okay altruistic one, I'd prefer teachers being excellent when motivated by upward mobility to teachers being pretty good because they feel like it's their duty. Or worse, terrible because they know they can't be fired, as is the case today and will continue to be the case if wages are simply raised by union pressure.